This is a short video which is meant to help you brush up your concepts. We start off with Chapter 1, the demographic structure of Indian society. What is the meaning of the word demography? Well, it is the systematic study of population. What do you mean by society? The society is a collectivity of a group of individuals who are involved in persistent social interaction and they share the same spatial location. Remember, our social context shapes our opinions, beliefs, and expectations about society and the social relations. Now, when we are studying the Indian society, we find that colonialism has shaped the Indian consciousness. How? Well, colonialism gave birth to nationalism and it created new classes such as the urban middle class and also new communities such as religious or caste-based communities. When studying demography, we have to look at Europe and especially the latter half of the 18th century. There were two different processes that were going on. One, the formation of the nation states, and second, the beginning of modern science of statistics. Now, when we're talking about the nation state, this modern state began to expand its roles and functions. In what ways? Well, it started to take an active interest in the development of public health management, the maintenance of law and order, and agriculture, industry, the different policies, revenue generation, governance, etc. For doing all these things, data was required and data collected through the form of a census. That is, a census is the systematic collection of data on the people who are living within a specific territory. Demography can be divided into two types, that is formal demography, which is primarily concerned with the measurement and analysis of the components of population change, and it has a mathematical methodology. The second one is social demography or population studies, which inquires into the wider causes and consequences of population structure and change. So, in essence, demography studies the change in population size, the pattern of birth rate, death rate, migration, that is the structure and composition of the population. Now, two important theories are there in your book. One is the Malthusian theory of population growth, and the second one is the theory of demographic transition. Malthusian theory was propounded by Robert Malthus, and he was a British political economist. His essay on population in 1798 provides us a theory on population growth. In this essay, he discusses how population rises in geometric progression, that is 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, while agricultural production rises in arithmetic progression, that is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Now, this causes an imbalance between the human population and the agricultural output. And in order to remove this imbalance, there are preventive checks and positive checks. What are the preventive checks? Well, the preventive checks are in the form of restraint, like, for example, postponing your marriage or abstaining from marriage or using contraceptives or engaging in celibacy, and positive checks like natural disasters in the form of floods, earthquakes, or disease, pandemics, famines, wars, etc. Now, his theory was criticized by people in the sense that agricultural growth was shown to outstrip population growth. Liberals and Marxist scholars also criticized his theory. They said that poverty was caused mainly because of the unequal distribution of economic resources, not because of population growth. In the European countries, there was a remarkable decline in population and in epidemics. And thus, Malthus's theory was proved false because food production and the standard of living began to rapidly grow. Now, let's look at the second theory, that is the theory of demographic transition. The demographic theory of transition focuses on three stages of population growth. The first stage is marked with low population growth in the society. That is, there are high birth and death rates. This society is an underdeveloped and technologically backward society. Then we have the transitory stage, which is the stage where you find that there's a high population growth in the society simply because the birth rate is high and the death rate is low. Now, this stage is the stage related to population explosion. Better nutrition and good health and advanced method of disease control has rapidly brought down the death rate, but the birth rate still remains high. The third stage is the stage that is marked with low population growth in the society. Why? Because both the death rate and the birth rate have been reduced, and this kind of feature is found in developed society. Now, let us look at the criticism of the demographic transition theory. First of all, it does not take into account migration, which is a huge determinant of population growth. Secondly, it neglects varying factors like natural disasters, pandemics, which can cause high death rates. Third, the aftermath of wars can also lead to an increase in the birth rate, like the baby boom that happened in US post World War II. Let's look at some common concepts and indicators. First thing to understand is that the demographic concepts are expressed as rates or ratios. Why? Because they involve two numbers. Most countries of the world are required to report birth rates and death rates to the appropriate authorities like the police station or the PHCs in a village or the municipal office in the towns and cities. What do you mean by the rate of natural population increase? Well, that is the difference between the birth rate and the death rate. Next question. What do you mean by the population has stabilized? This means that there is a difference, very small difference between the birth rate and the death rate. Now, the crude rate, remember, is a rough average. Historically, worldwide, there are more females than males in the world, despite slightly more male babies being born than female babies. More women outlive men. Another thing to keep in mind is the definition of the working population. Well, that is defined as those between the age group of 15 to 64 years of age. Another term that should be kept in mind is the demographic dividend or the demographic advantage that arises because of the falling dependency ratio and can be a source of economic growth and prosperity. This is due to a larger proportion of workers relative to non workers. Consequently, a rising dependency ratio is a cause of concern for countries, especially those which have a large aging population, say, for example, Japan. Now, how is that a cause of concern? Because there is a relatively smaller proportion of working population as compared to the larger proportion of the non-working population, and this becomes difficult for that small working population to carry the burden. Now, the next important term that one should remember is pandemic. What is a pandemic? It is an epidemic that affects a very wide geographical area. Example would be COVID, and in the past it was the Spanish flu. Now, one another aspect to keep in mind is that a lot of people in the working age group is not going to be beneficial unless and until it is accompanied by an increase in the level of education and employment. That is, the changing age structure by itself cannot guarantee any benefits unless it is properly utilized, and that through proper planned development. Also note that there has been a drastic fall in the child sex ratio, that is due to the severe neglect of the baby girl child during infancy and sex specific abortions, female infanticide. So, the prenatal diagnostic techniques regulation and prevention of misuse act was introduced in 1996 and further strengthened in 2003 to address this issue. The next indicator that we're going to look at is literacy, which is an instrument of empowerment. Literate population means that it has greater knowledge and there is a greater consciousness, greater health awareness, and fuller participation in the economic, cultural aspects of the community. Now remember, literacy varies across gender, regions, and social groups. Let's look at the rural-urban differences. The vast majority of our population has always lived in rural areas. According to the 2011 census, about 69% of the people lived in rural areas as opposed to 31% living in urban areas. Two important terms that you should be aware of are mass transit and mass communication, and these two help bridge the gap between rural and urban areas. How? Well, mass transit means that there is a movement of people through improved transportation, and mass communication has helped create an awareness amongst the ruralites. The reason for the outflow of people from the villages has been due to the decline of common property resources like ponds, forests, and grazing land. Earlier on, the village people who did not own any land were able to survive. Now, since these have become private property, the opportunity to earn has become very limited in a village, and hence the migration to urban areas. One of the important features of the city is the anonymity it provides to number one, the socially oppressed groups, or to the poorer sections of the socially dominant rural groups. That is, these people can engage in low status work which they would not be able to do in their native villages. Also, metropolises have grown the fastest, and this has resulted in the attraction of more rural people to urban areas. According to the last census, 5,161 towns and cities are existing in India. Now, the last subtopic that we are going to cover is the family planning program. In fact, India was the first country to explicitly announce in 1952 a population policy. In the early days, the primary objective of the National Family Planning Program was to slow down the rate of population growth through the birth control method, to improve the public health standards, and third, to increase public awareness about population and health issues. Now, this program suffered a setback in 1975-76 during the emergency period, and we have the renaming of this program to National Family Welfare Program after the emergency. We see from this chapter that most demographic variables are ultimately matters of economic, social, and cultural change. Demographers use a population pyramid in order to visualize the age and sex variables. On the basis of fertility and mortality rates, The population pyramid can be categorized into three types. That is, number one, stationary, number two, expansive, number three, constrictive. Stationary pyramids is a pyramid where the number of births and deaths roughly match one another. Expansive pyramid is a pyramid which is very wide at the base, and this kind of pyramid is a characteristic of countries with a very high birth and death rate. So in this population pyramid, the population is said to be growing fast and the size of each birth cohort increases each year. In a constrictive pyramid, it is narrow at the bottom and it is bulging towards the center. Now, this population pyramid is generally found in the most developed countries where there's a high level of education, where there is easy access to birth control, a good healthcare system. Population is generally older on an average as the country has long life expectancy, a low death rate, and also a low birth rate. And with this, we conclude this chapter.